So summer's just over? It's just like that? No easing in period? We're just in fall? I consider this still mid-August. Waking up every day, going through the hoodie collection and sweaters. This is not what I envisioned. This is not what I imagined. This isn't part of the deal. Canadian summer gotta be a little bit longer than this. I know you see the X come to town and you automatically go, okay, we're fast approaching, but not this. Not this way. But the big indicator is always fall. It's the X. And then it's feeling like you really care about NFL football again. And I'm there. It's always a bit of a slow burn for me at the beginning of the preseason because it's hard for the NFL to tell me to care about the preseason when they do the best job of not caring about the preseason out of anybody. Like, actually, let's bring in Brady Quinn's online. We're the return of Brady Quinn, our Monday morning guy, of course, Fox Sports, former NFL, Notre Dame QB. What's up, buddy? If the Falcons aren't playing Michael Penix in preseason games, like if you're not playing your rookie quarterbacks in preseason games, how am I supposed to care about it, like, at all? What is the function of the preseason if not for that?
It's a fair question, and it's one that I really can't make much sense of, with one exception, and that being his injury history. Sure. Remember, he played a long time in college football. He has a litany of injuries. I mean, from multiple ACLs, shoulder surgeries, all those things. And so if the concern is we don't want to put him out there in what we believe to be a meaningless game, because we've seen through camp, we've seen through minicamp, we've seen now in a short stint in preseason action, we've seen enough to know we feel good about where he's at as our backup. There's an element of like, okay, maybe that's what they're concerned by, is just making sure that he's not going out there, even though he's not their starter, and getting subjected to any hits in a meaningless game. The only other caveat to that is, and you hear it sometimes with, for example, a player like Zach Wilson. Sean Payton's been really talking him up, and the performance he's had in preseason and training camp is, some of these guys like Tyler Heineke, who's on the Atlanta Falcons, who's got starting experience and has had his moments, they're trying to trade for a conditional 7th-round pick or 6th-round pick and flip them for something. And oftentimes that's what's being utilized here by the front office. And we might say, well, that doesn't mean much, but it does when it ends up being a part of a package for a trade. And when they maneuver around to find someone, and then you find a diamond in the rough that you come to find out you found from the trade of Tyler Heineke. So all those things are still potentially, I think, on the table as teams are trying to set their rosters. But between the injury history of Penix and the potential thought that, Heineke's probably not going to be on the roster if they're not going to keep 3 quarterbacks on the active roster, that you'd want to get something back in return. That's the only sense I can make of it, JD.
Dude, that's honestly the funniest thing, though, is, hey, NFL preseason action, catch the fever. We're here auditioning for 7th-round picks. we're trying to get 7th-round picks going. I actually looked at it a little bit more conspiratorial because, all right, if Michael Penix is ready to play, I think he's pretty NFL ready. You mentioned his career. But if he's so injury prone that you're terrified of putting him on the field instead of giving him reps, then maybe you shouldn't have taken him in the first round. And you and I are both big believers of Penix, and I just, like, you're that terrified to take a longer look. Not a great indicator of that injury history. My point of curiosity is, like, do they want to dampen down the hype a little bit for this player? Because I got to imagine Penix coming in there with a lot of young weapons, knowing what kind of a guy he is. Like, he's a magnetic guy. He's got a real personality. He's someone that I think is going to resonate with a lot of those young weapons in the locker room. You got Kirk Cousins, who was already a little pissed off about the situation, like, as much as Kirk Cousins is ever going to show, right? Being surprised in the draft that this was the position that they ended up taking with the 8th overall pick. Do you think there's any element of this where they're like, we got to try to make sure it's very, very, very clear that Kirk is the starter and not give Penix a big opportunity to kind of Russell Wilson this, where the entire narrative during the preseason, when all we care about is rookies, is how ready Michael Penix looks and how good he looks, so that if Kirk stumbles out of the gate, people aren't calling for his job, 10 snaps into the season?
It's not a bad theory. I think it's one that organizations are more cognizant of their quarterback room and not creating drama themselves with some of these moves. And I think they understand, based on how the offseason went, that clearly the signing of Cousins combined with the top 10 pick of Penix has led to some of that speculation or some of that concern. So it's something that, I don't know if they go as far as saying, like, let's not play him at all, to be able to, dampen down any hype around it. But it could make some sense if you are really that concerned about any, slow start to the season. But I'd argue this. If you're concerned about a slow start to the seasons with Kirk Cousins, then, you've got to be thinking that if you're the front office and you're paying him $100 million, you're going to be answering to the owner anyway. And so I'm not sure that bodes well as it is for Raheem Morris and really the rest of the front office that convinced Arthur Blank, again, not to go with Bill Belichick and instead go with their vision, their plan moving forward, which was apparently taking Penix top 10 and signing Kirk Cousins to $100 million.
So what do you think that's like from a locker room dynamic standpoint? Because you've been in it, right? You get drafted, you're highly touted first-round pick. You go to the Cleveland Browns, and then your first year there is the Derek Anderson Pro Bowl year, right? And so you've got a guy playing his very best of his career. You've got some excitement around the organization. And then yet here you are, like a guy who probably feels like he's ready to play. You've probably also got, like, is there factioning in the locker room? Like some guys almost like hedging their bets to be like, well, Brady's going to be the guy. So, got to make sure that everything's cool with him. Everything's good with him. And I don't know what your relationship was like with Derek Anderson at the time, but if I'm him, you're like the least of my concerns because I'm having a Pro Bowl year. And the same thing with Kirk Cousins. What is he now? 36? 35, 36, somewhere in that range. Like, he went there to go and try to win a Super Bowl, try to cement that legacy. Yeah, how is it being that guy, the Michael Penix in this situation where, you're kind of trying to find your place in the league, but also there's probably a little bit of politicking?
Well, the difference is obviously Derek Anderson wasn't getting $100 million before I got drafted there. If that was the case, it's a pretty real statement that the organization is committed at least to having him for the first 2 years of what is this 4-year deal that Cousins was given. So that's one of the first things that I would say is a pretty big difference where Cousins is the guy. I mean, there's no one who's going to dispute that. It's going to take a lot for him not playing well or an injury that's going to limit him playing at all, really this season where Penix goes in and flourishes for that to change. But, going back to that time, that year, I think it's twofold. There's not necessarily like politicking or factions, but there definitely is an element for every rookie, and in particular for Michael Penix, where, you have to prove yourself to the veterans. You have to prove that you can go in and do the job and you can be the guy. And when you don't get an opportunity to do that in live games, it makes it more difficult to do it. And so, for my preseason, my rookie year, there was elements where all those guys saw that and how I conducted myself and how I prepared, they saw that. So it wasn't so much like that. And Derek had a career year. I mean, the big difference, again, not to, go back and look at the two scenarios, but Kirk Cousins is a very accomplished quarterback coming into this. You kind of know what you're getting. It was more of a kind of surprise by how things worked out. I mean, don't forget, Charlie Fry really was the quarterback that started that season. He was who prepared the entire offseason, battled out with Derek Anderson, and then he was benched at halftime of week 1 and then traded after that game. So, again, all that stuff kind of came together as more of a surprise than by design. This is by design by the Atlanta Falcons. And so they're probably going to be much more measured with how they go about handling the locker room dynamics and who's the leader on the team, et cetera. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing because I think Kirk Cousins has to understand at some point, too, at this point in time in his career, given his age and all that, this is probably it. This is probably the last, couple years, 2 or 3 years he's going to have. And if you look at the track record of young quarterbacks drafted in the NFL that have had success, sitting for a year, maybe a couple of years or a few years in Jordan Love's case, has ended up benefiting them really well. So this is the model, and this is what Atlanta is trying to implement, I think, in the organization. And so I don't think there's going to be factions or issues like that within the locker room dynamics. I think everyone understands Kirk Cousins is the guy, given his track record and the $100 million he's getting guaranteed.
Yeah, the money's huge. You're right. Like that's the thing that every time I try to come up with one of these theories or have one of these discussions, then you're reminded of like, oh, right, they've got so much invested in him financially that it's just, it's hard to picture any other scenario. So I found that, and I'm sure it's the same as you, and it's a good time because you're, college and NFL guy, but this preseason specifically feels like it's just completely revolved around watching these rookie quarterbacks. And it actually kind of reminds me of 2012, where it's, and actually, I think speaking of Kirk Cousins, because I'm pretty sure that was his draft year, which is, sad for me to think about and try to realize right now that that's that long ago. But yeah, it's like RG3, Andrew Luck, kind of pairing as the Caleb Williams, and McDaniels thing at the Daniels thing at the top. And then there's sort of that conversation about Penix with the Russell Wilson thing. You got I guess J.J. McCarthy getting hurt. There was nobody like that. But just a deep pool of rookie QBs that we all want to see, and where it felt like, okay, this is going to be a lot of new faces of the league. I want to start with Caleb Williams. There's been some spectacular plays, right? And we've seen a few of it. He looks like he's really connected with his teammates through the Hard Knocks series. My question for you about him is he's got the, Mahomes, hey, when the play breaks down, he's got that magic. But where are you at in terms of needing to see him play from the pocket in an NFL system? Like, how ready do you think he's going to be for that day one for the Bears?
I think he's ready day one for that. I don't think that's the part of his game that needs to evolve or improve. I mean, honestly, at this point in time in his career, from what I saw from him at college and what I saw so far in the preseason, I'm not as concerned about that. He has held on to the ball a little bit longer, but some of that's come via byproduct of the protection. Some of that comes as a byproduct of guys not being able to separate. And I think my concern more becomes we kind of tend to forget, like Andy Reid's a hell of a coach. He's an hell of an offensive mind. Mm-hmm. If you look at the team that Patrick Mahomes inherited, it was one in which was already a playoff team. That is not this for the Chicago Bears. They're a team that's got an over-under win-loss total at 8.5. Do they have some talent? Sure. Should we be excited about Rome Odunze and DJ Moore and some of the other pieces? Sure, but they are not there yet. Let's not be mistaken by that, by any shape that or imagination. Shane Waldron, their offensive coordinator, is coming in now trying to revamp this and get more than what Luke Getsy was able to do over the past couple of years. And I think he's tasked with a tough part for any coordinator who's taking over at a new team is how much do you really want to show in preseason? How much do you really want to put out there for teams to see? I mean, I go back to 2009 when Eric Mangini came in. We had Brian Daboll, obviously now head coach of the Giants, and it was his first preseason calling plays then. And I recall, once I got traded to the Broncos after that year, I'd asked those guys, because we had a week 2 matchup in Denver versus that defense, and they were like, dude, you guys ran every single thing we saw in the preseason. They're like, you guys didn't mix it up at all. And so that's the tough part for Shane Waldron is how much of the offense does he really want to show to see how these guys are going to execute, to evaluate how these guys are going to fit in, versus how much he wants to hold back to then implement into a week-to-week basis of scheme and all of that. I mean, it's a tougher decision than most realize, because when you become, that new offensive coordinator, no different than Arthur Smith, for example, in Pittsburgh, you're tasked with showing out, and then showing out in the preseason matters to at least the fans, or at least the public perception of where this offense is at. So I think that's the tough part for Waldron as he takes over. And I think that's the tough thing about comparing Patrick Mahomes and him taking over with Kansas City, again, after a year, basically with the exception of one game of playing, and all that talent around him. That roster was much better suited to win right now and to showcase that. Caleb Williams is not in that position. So I think he's going to have to do more and make some of those kind of Patrick Mahomes-esque plays, just because of a byproduct of what's around him and all those moving parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Mahomes didn't have to deal with the hype quotient of this either, right? Like when he came in, it was established that he was going to sit. Even when he became the starter, I remember being excited for it, but it wasn't like, holy crap, here comes the very next guy. Like with Caleb Williams, it's been that since he was at USC. It's been that now for the entire preseason. He's been the number one storyline. He's enters right away into Hard Knocks. Like it's a very, very, very different level of celebrity for him. And I do wonder how much that's going to factor into sort of the pressure of this thing going on. You know what, though? Kind of to speak to where we're at with the preseason stuff, I think that from fans, the show out part to fans, now it comes from like obviously the national coverage, that stuff is going to center on the rookies, and people want to hear about how a guy's showing out, as you put it. But I think from your like actual fan base, all you're caring about is the practices. What you're hearing them from 7-on-7s matters more to me now, more than anything that you're getting from the preseason. The reports of how good somebody looks at camp, and that's sort of been the way that I've been viewing the Jayden Daniels thing. Is he's had far less hype with the preseason stuff. But the reports that are coming out of Washington are pretty ravey about this guy. And I wonder if you think we've given a little too, like, not too much attention to Caleb Williams, but if Jayden Daniels actually has, as good of a shot as this guy to end up winning Rookie of the Year. Like, are we kind of underrating the start that Jayden Daniels is having right now?
100%. I mean, we were actually talking about this yesterday on our radio show, and I can't believe there's the gap that there is, and you could probably look this up in real time for me, JD, between Caleb Williams' odds to win Offensive Rookie of the Year and Jayden Daniels. And I want to say Jayden Daniels, the last time I looked, it was plus 400, plus 450, somewhere in that ballpark. And Caleb Williams was like plus 135 or something like that, which is shocking only because, again, Jayden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winner, had the best film of any of these quarterbacks, despite the fact that he wasn't taken number one overall last year, is very capable of coming in with that system under Cliff Kingsbury and the talent that they have around him. I mean, that team is much better suited to have success, I think, even as you compare the two divisions. Yes, I think Detroit is the top team in the NFC North, but they've got to also prove it again. When you look at the NFC East and really what Jayden Daniels has to battle with, to me, it's a much greater battle with obviously Philly, because they're the top of that division, in my opinion, and their run of success has been pretty clear. Dallas will be competitive, but who knows with all the stuff going on off the field. And then the Giants, we have no idea if that could turn into a dumpster fire, but there's definitely an opportunity for them, I think, to be competitive and win a lot of football games with the way that roster's built. So I think people are maybe underscoring a little bit. I mean, the one point of caution that I would take is reading too much into the practice stats. I kind of hate the fact that some of that stuff gets out there, because you also have no idea what that quarterback's being directed to do. You know, there's times we've walked back in the quarterback room, broken down the film, and it's like, you're throwing a check down because it's 7-on-7, and you're always pretty much going to have a check down or someone underneath open. And meanwhile, you missed the deep post, or you missed, some similar window that you should have been hitting or should have been throwing into. You know, as far as being graded, like, that's a minus. But yet it looks like a completion, so it looks like, oh, hey, he was perfect in 7-on-7. Well, you should be. I mean, it's completely in the offensive advantage. So that's the hard part about reading too much into practice stats. It's not a game, and it's honestly, not knowing what the directive is to those quarterbacks, to some of the players. You never know. I mean, I remember there'd be years in preseason camp, we'd come out because the defense knows everything you're doing so much, because you go up against each other all the time. But we'd try to come out and throw basically routes that would be in a progression that we'd almost never throw, and just either keep the defense honest or to see how we could go about manipulating the defense to get some of those routes open. So there's all sorts of gamesmanship and things that go on during the course of preseason and camp, which is why it's always hard for me to read into that stuff.
So Caleb Williams, by the way, is plus 130 right now. Jayden Daniels is plus 450 for offensive rookie year.
I mean, does that not seem absurd to you? Yeah, like there's that big of a gap?
You know what I think part of it is? One is that even though the Bears haven't exactly been, hanging Super Bowl banners the last couple of decades, I think that people do view Washington just as so dysfunctional that something's going to go wrong. But two is he keeps getting the RG3 comparisons, and I think people think because he's tall and slight that he's going to get hurt. Like that's kind of baked into this price, is that people can't separate him from RG3.
Well, and by the way, RG3, regardless of his injury, he did win the offensive rookie of the year that year.
Yeah, so, I was going to say that's the ironic part of this.
Yeah.
So I'm with you.
I think you'd be wise if you are into gaming and gambling. You want to throw some money down. To me, that make more sense based on the value, because I think that gap is too wide. Jayden Daniels should be somewhere like plus 200 odds, not plus 450.
So can I ask you about this one though? The one that is kind of stands out as interesting, and it's because it looks like he's going to start, is Bo Nix is plus 900.
Yeah. I think he's plus 900 because there's a lot of concern about what this team's going to look like during the course of the regular season. He's looked phenomenal, and as he should. He's got, 61 starts coming out of college. He was the most experienced. You look at what Sean Payton traditionally does. He really puts his quarterbacks in a position to succeed and to stat-wise look good, and that's his prerogative. Remember, this is his draft pick. This is his roster now that he's kind of taken over and shaped to his liking. And if it doesn't work out, it's all going to be on him. Mm-hmm. But, I think Bo Nix is going to be good this year. I don't know in the end if he'll be as dynamic as, the aforementioned quarterbacks and Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams. I could be wrong. His film going back and, before the draft, I thought was the third best. It was Jayden Daniels 1, Penix 2, Bo Nix 3. But, again, how that's going to translate when the real live bullets are flying, when teams are scheming up to take away some of your weaknesses, that's where I'll be curious. You talked about playing from the pocket with timing and anticipation. He's one of those guys that I'm curious to see how that's going to go when his first read's not there. How does he play from the pocket? Can he get to 2, 3, and 4? Because he didn't have to do that a ton in college. When he did sometimes and it wasn't there, I thought he kind of leaned and relied on his legs a little bit too much. And that's not a bad thing when you're athletic like he is, but eventually it leads to injuries and eventually it plays into the hand of the defense.
So to close the gambling portion of this, I just want to say to people, don't try to get cute with the wide receiver stuff. Don't get caught by the Marvin Harrisons or the Roma Dunzes. Just a reminder is Puka Nacua had 2 NFL records for rookies last year with receptions and yards, and he didn't win. So don't do that. Go with the quarterback. My reasoning for the Bo Nix play, though, kind of is I think there's a little bit more pressure on Sean Payton, to me anyways, than it's being sort of not reported on, but discussed right now. He's not a regular rookie. It was a huge reach. He's 24 years old. And it's supposed to be you are the guy that can put someone in your offense. You got rid of Russell Wilson. You said, bite the bullet, eat all this cash. I'm going to go out and get this kid. I don't think you have a 3-year runway where Bo Nix can just sort of look like a rookie. I kind of think he's got to step in and look more than competent. If you're Sean Payton, I think, I don't want to say it's a legacy play here, but your reputation is a little at stake for me with that ownership group if Bo Nix comes in here and doesn't thrive.
It also lends me to think that if he doesn't go in there and start and play well right away, he's not going to be scared to put Jarrett Stidham in there. He might not be scared if Zach Wilson's still there to put him in there. Despite the fact that I still don't know if Zach Wilson ends up, making the roster. We'll see how this all works out. I mean, he's kind of had his moments, but he's also struggled at times this preseason. So, we'll see what's potentially there. But to your point, I do feel like this is a little bit about the legacy of Sean Payton. This is about how we're going to remember Sean Payton. The Super Bowl he won with the Saints and everything he brought to the city of New Orleans back then was a long time ago. And it feels like, not only did he kind of struggle, which, those 3 seasons of 7 and 9 in a row, all of a sudden start to come to mind, and how last year went with Russell, when Russell, at least statistically speaking, wasn't that bad. So if these quarterbacks can't play above that standard that Russell had last year, it's going to be hard to kind of justify, outside of the contract for Russell Wilson, why you're moving on and why you kind of wanted to start and rebuild. So I think there's a lot of pressure on. There's probably more pressure from that standpoint on Bo Nix than any other quarterback in this draft class because of all those things are so meaningful to Sean Payton.
Yeah, the only other quarterback who I'm kind of lumping in with them who's not part of this draft class, though, is the Anthony Richardson thing. Because, you mentioned the 7-on-7s and how, or the practice reports. Here's my understanding of the practice reports is that if you look bad in 7-on-7s, that's not good because that means you have all the advantages. This is supposed to be where you're just kind of picking guys apart from the pocket, that it has something to say about your ability to throw the football. And by all accounts, Richardson hasn't looked great there. So are you reading anything into that?
I think he was always a player that I wasn't going to say in the years 1 and 2 is going to be playing his best football in the NFL.
Yeah, fair.
To me, he was always going to be a long-term project. I was surprised that he got as injured as he did last year, but I guess that was kind of part of the unknowns, or one of the unknowns when you only have a guy who started 1 year in college. You don't necessarily know how he's going to hold up over a long period of time because he's only started one season. So that was a bit surprising, only because he's huge. He's a big kid.
Yeah.
And so I really thought he would be able to kind of take the some of the force and the power and the tackles that come along with the NFL, but that wasn't the case. So now that's a concern. Then you combine it with, from the passing standpoint, this is always a concern. When you're breaking down his tape from last year and even in college, you're kind of saying, well, he's not a guy who's playing from the pocket with mastery yet. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising, and I guess maybe that's why I kind of take it with a grain of salt. And I think this is an offense that's going to be based primarily on running the football, him being a part of that at times, but otherwise, allow him to do the things he excels at, getting the ball out of his hand quick and then throwing the ball deep down the field, or designing in some of that, which Shane Steichen's one of the best at doing it. So I guess I'm not as concerned about it, only because I only feel like the Colts are going to hit their ceiling at the time that someone forces them offensively to not be able to do the things that Shane Steichen wants to do.
I guess that's
it probably starts with stopping the run and then forcing him to play from the pocket solely, which is where obviously they'd struggle.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. My only reason for them feeling like they have more pressure is that Colts were still 9-8 last year with Minshew. And it does feel like their coaching is really good and that there's a lot of talent on that team. And if they could just figure out the quarterback position to be like competent and healthy and have that read option that seemed to be promised to them, that, all of a sudden you're kind of looking at a team in that division and it's like maybe they're kind of frisky, maybe they're kind of dangerous. They just feel a little bit up the track with the rest of the roster and the coaching staff than they do with the quarterback, where you're like, well, he's a long-term development play. Just that it doesn't feel like it fully matches up. Okay, so last one on the rookie QBs, and this is another development play thing. So I didn't watch a lot of Drake Maye in college. His team wasn't on my TV a lot. So I'm watching him in the preseason, and I thought, boy, the Josh Allen comp is very generous. Like very, 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 very generous. That team is, like, when it comes to like lack of talent, I would say the Patriots are pretty high on the list. New coaching staff, all this different stuff. Yeah, it's a given that Brissett is going to start the season for the Patriots, I think, at this point. But how long do you think Drake Maye should sit? Is this a full season for you, or is this hey, we're going to get through the tough part of our schedule early on and then throw him into the fire?
It's a tough question to answer, in part because it's not like he didn't play a lot of football at the college level. Now granted, it's I guess hard to compare when we just talked about Bo Nix. He's got 61 starts, 24, turning 25. So it's a little tough in saying that, but I think you drafted him where you did at number 3 overall for a reason. I'm not a guy who's a believer in that they should start Jacoby Brissett unless Gerard Mayo really feels like they need to, sit him because he's not ready. That's obviously a different conversation to have. But I think this is a team that's in complete rebuild mode. I think they need to keep that in mind, but also get him out there, let him get some experience at the NFL level, and allow him to continue to grow, and just understand that there's going to be a lot of bumps that come along that way. But again, in regards to the Josh Allen comp, I'm not sure who made that or why they felt that way.
There's a lot of that.
Well, he throws a good deep ball, but he doesn't have the live arm like Allen does. He's not as big. He's not as athletic, not as dynamic of an athlete like that. So
yeah.
I never saw that. I honestly thought he was just kind of maybe a better version of Sam Howell, only because there was a lot of comparisons to, how those two played.
That's a very big difference of being arguably the most talented quarterback in the NFL to the Seahawks backup QB.
Well, and take this with a grain of salt. I mean, one, people thought some teams thought a lot more highly of Sam Howell than others
sure.
In regards to where he ended up getting drafted and all that. And obviously he started the season for Washington last year. So, there's that to be said. But again, a better version of him. But when you looked at their kind of skill set and what they both did during their time in North Carolina, very similar, as far as what their skill was. I think the hardest thing for Drake Maye is you've got a 6th-round pick in Joe Milton who's turned some heads and obviously impressed people because he probably is the better comp to Josh Allen, if we're being real, as far as size, as far as arm strength, as far as, potential athleticism. And so, that's the hard part is you've got a guy who, at the NFL level has looked extraordinary because he's got an arm that's, probably top 3 strongest in the league. And he's gigantic and he's athletic and he can do all the things. So if Milton can ever figure out, how to play consistently from the pocket and kind of grow as well, like he's going to have legit competition, in years 2 and 3 on this roster, if that's the case.
I just, for me, when I watched, and again, it's small preseason stuff, but when I watched Drake Maye run, I didn't think about Josh Allen. I thought about, I didn't watch a ton of him in college, but who I did watch in college because I like college hoops is I watched a lot of his brother, Luke Maye. And he looked like how Luke Maye ran on a basketball court. Yeah, I get it. Like kind of lumbering and you're big. It wasn't explosive, and I don't expect him to be like hurdling guys right away. Anyway, that's enough of the slander about the kid. Okay, so last year, you and I were both very invested. Like we believed in the Lions early on. And it's like the 9-8 team that became, 12-5 and actually really exceeded expectations. They're right there in a championship game. In fact, they should have been in the Super Bowl, really. This year, again, we're in the time of year where we're looking at all these teams and it goes, oh, yeah, it's going to be the same old, where we'll see the Ravens there. We'll see the Chiefs there. Now we're going to see the Lions there. We're putting them on the list. We're going to see the Niners. Just run it all back. Who is the team right now that is in that range, the leap range, who you really believe in is going to take that next step? And then by the end of the year, we're going to say, yeah, you know what? They are a Super Bowl contender.
Oof. I think Atlanta's one that is kind of easy to say because of all the hype around them. But I do think there's some legitimacy to that. I think Raheem Morris is always going to do a good job with the defense. They've got a lot of talent there. They're in the NFC, which is the easiest path. Outside of Philly and San Francisco, I think you look at the rest of the NFC and go, yeah, why not? Like, why can't Atlanta be that next team that's a part of it? And so maybe that's just kind of a chalky pick because of how the offseason has gone, but I'm kind of a believer in what they're capable of being. The AFC side, the hard part is like we've seen so many of the same cast of characters, but to me, it's the Browns. That's the most, I would say, a top 3 as far as talented roster. And it all really comes down to, dude, they might actually have the best roster. I don't even know why I'm saying top 3. When you stack up the talent they have, if their O-line's healthy, which they've been banged up this preseason training camp, but if they're healthy, that's probably the best roster in the NFL. And if Deshaun Watson can be anywhere close to what they need him to be, they could win a Super Bowl. Like they could be a team that wins and takes that next step. And I know people think this may be biased because I was there for 3 years, but it's not. Like I think you look on paper at that roster and tell me I'm crazy that they don't have one of the most stacked teams and rosters in the NFL that was able to be as good as they were last year with a 4th quarterback because they were able to overcome so many injuries. How many teams can lose a guy like Nick Chubb and they don't even blink? They just kind of keep moving forward, keep pushing forward. The addition of Judy too in the offseason, I think, will help add another element to their passing game. I think what they've built there in Cleveland allows them to be very, very capable of taking that next step. But they are playing, to me, in the toughest division in the NFL. I think, as much as I'm saying this about Cleveland, any one of those teams in the AFC North, I think, could win that division if, and that's a big if, probably mostly in Pittsburgh, if the offense comes together for Russell Wilson or even Justin Fields for that matter. Okay,
so can I play devil's advocate on the AFC North thing?
Sure.
I actually believe in the stuff you're saying about Cleveland. I haven't seen any of the old Deshaun Watson in that uniform. Like maybe a couple of plays, maybe parts of a drive, but never even like a fully sustained game where I went, holy crap. Like the Mahomes comeback game against Houston, where you were like, oh, these are the 2 quarterbacks of the future. And it was like, yeah, we haven't seen that guy return. And so until I see it, I just can't buy fully into them being their biggest potential. The Steelers thing, I'm already writing off the Steelers. It's over. Like Russell Wilson, I'm a huge Seahawks fan. I watched a lot of his career. I never wanted him to go down like this, but it just looks, the athleticism seems completely gone. And I think that they've probably got a little controversy within their own ranks, the way guys are talking about Fields. And then it's just Justin Fields, who Yeah, like I get it. I'll see a highlight pack of him at the end of the season, and you're going to go, "Wow, is that one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL?" And you're going to be like, "No, he won 3 games." And I'll go, "Right, that makes a lot of sense." I just think that their season's done. That their offense is not going to be even halfway competent. So I'm writing them off. 2 is the Bengals thing. We're giving the Bengals a lot of credit for things that happened a while ago in a league that moves very, very fast. And I'm a Burrow guy, but can I see it? You know, can I see it?
Yeah.
And then
I get it.
Yeah, and then with the Ravens, like you lose Mike McDonald, and like we've seen everybody was all over the lines, right? They were like, oh man, if they lose their coordinators, they're going to completely fall apart. They were special last year on defense, the way they schemed things up. And yeah, they've had a little bit of a drain as well. And it's like Derrick Henry and I think they're getting a little bit too much hype right now. I think that to me, when I'm trying to project the best division, the one that I'm highest on, it's actually the NFC North, because I love what the Packers have done. I believe that Jordan Love is a real deal. I think that the Lions are going to be genuinely the best team in the NFC this year. And then I think I'm a little higher on the Bears than you. And also, like, Sam Darnold was always going to be the starter of the Vikings. And I believe in their coaching staff. And I think that their floor is sneakily like playoff caliber, especially in that NFC. Like, if you're taking like a balance of top end teams with floor, give me the NFC North over the AFC North.
All right. I mean, I'll put it this way, though. I personally don't believe the odds are as tight from the bottom team in the AFC North to the top team to win the division as compared to the NFC North. Like,
yeah, that's right.
My bet would be that is it Pittsburgh is probably last place in the AFC North. I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
Would be with Chicago probably.
Yep.
Or maybe Minnesota in the NFC North. My bet would be that they're longer odds for Minnesota or Chicago.
They are.
Well, I mean, and so that's why I say, like, I think when you've got that much parity, at least in the betting markets in regards to who can win the division, it's kind of telling you the story as it is. Mm-hmm. The problem with the NFC North is Detroit last year was unbelievable. And there were some things that kind of went their way, too, if we're being honest. You know, will that happen again this year?
Yep.
It's hard. You know, it's hard for all that to always work out that way. It seemed to be a magical season for them last year. And so we'll see if they can do it again. For Minnesota, you know, how far are they removed from that 13-win season? And, you know, with Sam Darnold, you know, we'll see what the defense looks like and how improved they are. We'll see what the offense looks like under Darnold. There's a lot of question marks, in my opinion, there.
Yeah.
You know, you look at Chicago, that's a team that, again, I think is going to be improved, but I don't know that they're quite there. And if we're being honest about Green Bay, a great second half of the season last year. What about the first half?
Yeah,
like, no one's
that's
talking
the big
about
one.
That entire body of work. I think there's a lot less questions to me when it comes to the AFC North about what those teams' identity are and what they're going to be. And look, the comment you made about the Bengals, it's fair. Like, that's a team that can't sustain injuries because they don't have that deep of a roster too. But if they're all healthy, like, I think we both agree, they're probably biting for one of those 7 playoff spots.
For sure. Oh, for sure they are. I think that they're one of the favorites. My only thing is, too, is what do you make of pressure on a team in terms of, like, this seems like if you look at the money and their lack of depth already, just the way that they have to this feels like the last year it's going to be the Joe Burrow and the elite wide receivers. Like, something's got to give here. And I am kind of curious, him coming off of the injury, how healthy he's going to be able to maintain himself. And then the feeling of that group, like, holy crap, we were right there. We almost had it. And when you lose it and then kind of trying to chase that feeling and whether or not they're ever going to be able to recapture it. I kind of do believe in that. Do you?
Well, I think there's a degree of that, right? You're kind of speaking to momentum. You're kind of speaking to the windows of, you know, having a guy on his rookie deal and then now, you know, having to repay those guys. Like, that's the difficulty, I think, oftentimes for the Cowboys is, like, you look at CeeDee Lamb and you look at Micah Parsons, you look at a lot of the players they're trying to re-up. You drafted them. Like, you did a good job because they're all really good players, right? Dak Prescott, et cetera. So now you got to pay them, and that's the difficulty. And so the Bengals are in that boat right now. And I think the bigger difficulty for the Bengals is that's not a team that has deep pockets. That's not an ownership group that has deep pockets. In fact, it's probably bottom 3, bottom 4 of the league in regards to the amount of cash they can outlay in order to pay all these guys. So it makes structuring the contracts much more difficult because you are going to have to pay a portion of that through their salary and not through signing bonuses and roster bonuses or straight cash, to be blunt. So I think that makes it difficult. And in regards to the question about pressure, there's always going to be pressure when you're Joe Burrow, right? You came in as the number one overall pick. You came in as the guy who was a reigning Heisman Trophy winner. You've now been signed to this huge deal, and this is that moment and opportunity where you probably do have a last window of having all these guys together this season. Depending on when Jamar Chase decides to show up, and so the expectation is, hey, when those guys aren't there, very similar to Josh Allen this year, you have to be the high tide that raises all the boats. So I think every single year, once you sign that huge mega deal, whether you're Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, whoever, you're going to be tasked with that. And there's going to be seasons in and out where, and Sean McDermott's talked about it, but like they're rebuilding right now at the wide receiver spot. They're hoping Keon Coleman can be the guy that takes over as the number one wide receiver, but they're hoping. They don't know yet. Mm-hmm. And there's going to become a time and place where the Bengals may find themselves in that position. Now, I don't think they'll, they might be without, Higgins obviously in the future, but they're going to have Jamar Chase. They've done a good job drafting and developing, so they should be fine.
Yeah, I think so too. It's just I need the Bengals to be the huge winner this year in the AFC, where they just take that big leap and return to their spot, because I'm just down on so many other teams. Like I just have to imagine that the Chiefs finally have hit some type of a floor with their receivers, that there's going to be some growing pains with the group that they've got there. I am much lower on the Bills. Like I just am. I look at all they lost on defense and what they have as weapons for Josh Allen, and I'm like, yeah, I think Josh Allen's going to be able to carry them, but I don't feel as good about him as I did a year ago. Like, that's just a fact. Again, I don't feel as good about the Ravens. Like, you go across the league at the top teams, and it's hard to feel like, hey, I feel better about them. I think you're right on the Browns. I weirdly feel a little bit, I feel better about, obviously, the Bengals, but I want to see who kind of fills that void or who steps out, because I still also don't believe it's going to be the Jets. Anyway, Brady, it's great to have you back. Thanks again for doing this. I'm excited for a full season, buddy.
Yeah, same. I can't wait. Obviously, football's here, so excited about it. Excited for the opportunity to be again with you, JD.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Thanks for making time.